I just didn't realize those two cards comboed together. Yeah, turns out they do.
7 million.
7 you.
7.
Point Highlander.
Hello, and welcome to the 7 Point Cast. My name is Liam, and I'm joined by my co-host Mouse.
Hey everyone, really excited for this episode.
Today we're joined by Kixian, who's a venerable Magic player from Melbourne. Kixian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, g'day guys. Thanks for having me. My name's Kixian, I guess, on Discord, William or Billy in real life. And yeah, I'm a Lands player, so here to chat about Lands with you guys.
Hell yes. Big fan of Kix. Me, you and Liam have obviously had a lot of back and forths inside the Lands Discord. Do you want to tell people? It feels like nearly all of the 7 Point Discord is in there sometimes. But we want to tell people about the Lands Discord.
Yeah, the famous Lands Discord. I think we're almost 100 strong at this point, so we might actually be the second largest 7 Point Discord. I really have no idea about that. But yeah, the Lands Discord is basically just a space for people to come and chat about lands. It's quite a broad archetype, so we have a lot of discussion in there. We still haven't figured out exactly what a lands deck is, but we'll get there one day.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that question, do you want to give us the best kind of shot as what is a land archetype? Is you probably, if I had to name a single person who's been playing this deck the longest, the most consistently, it probably is you. So yeah, what do you reckon the lands deck is?
Yeah, I don't know if I've been playing the longest, but I think certainly over the last couple of years, I've probably been playing the most consistently out of anyone, which is, the sign of someone with too much time on their hands. But I guess lands is easiest described as you know it when you see it. I think realistically, it's quite a hard deck to nail down, but you do know a lands deck when you see one. If you're familiar with Legacy at all, obviously Legacy Lands is a great starting point for understanding what the deck is trying to do. Realistically speaking, it's pretty self-explanatory in the sense that a lands deck is trying to take advantage of lands. There's some really powerful lands in Magic, mostly older ones. So obviously you've got ones like Tabernacle, Strip Mine, Maze of Ith, and then your Dark Depths, Thespian Stage combo. So basically just all the broken lands, and you're just trying to take advantage of the fact that they exist, and they're very hard for your opponents to interact with.
Yeah, most notably, of course, because lands can't be countered with counter spells, right? Because they're not spells. They can't be removed with creature removal, which is the most common type of removal. Land removal in some ways is almost naturally not going to be common, right? Because it would almost ruin the game if there were lots of sinkhole type effects running around for all of the fair Magic players.
You know what they say, the only way to stop a bad guy with a lands deck is a good guy with a lands deck.
Yeah.
It's fairly true, but as a result of Strip Mine and Wasteland being pointed, and then obviously you have sort of weaker versions of that effect. You've got Ghost Quarter, you've got Field of Ruin, etc. But I think you just don't see those played too often, possibly because people don't respect lands, possibly because people have greedy mana bases. I don't really know, but yeah, you don't have a lot of ways to interact with lands unless you are a lands deck. So that gives us that sort of natural advantage, I guess.
Wait, you're saying that there are people out there who don't respect lands? Unbelievable.
Quick, we better D-point gamble just to show them.
I feel like, do you get the sense as well, the 7 Point Discord, lands might be like the archetype, which is the most commonly memed on, other than maybe in particular Psychic Frog.
Oh, absolutely. We're the king of memes, and the Lands Discord is where the best memes originate from, I think. So
yeah, hell yes. It's interesting, right? Because one of the things which I think of when I'm what makes a lands deck a lands deck? I kind of think it's almost like a deck where you really want your lands to be spells. And most decks, you kind of put your mana pile aside, and then maybe your threats and your spells or whatever. But with lands, I almost have this the mana lands pile and the spell lands pile, and then cards like Exploration and Fast Bond are almost kind of cast one more spell a turn type thing. Have you ever had thoughts kind of like that as to what makes lands lands?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of think of it in three piles. I have spell lands, which to me are the ones that don't tap for mana at all. So your Maze of Ith, your Tabernacle, Dark Depths, Glacial Chasm. And then I have utility lands, which are ones that have, again, like powerful effects, Thespian Stage, Strip Mine, Karakas, Urza's Saga, but they actually tap for mana, often colorless mana. And then, yeah, you just your mana lands. And there's obviously some overlap between those, like you get some utility out of Surveil lands, for example. But yeah, for the most part, I think the 3 piles, and particularly, like you said, the ones that don't have a mana in particular, they do seem a lot more like spells. And you have to treat them as spells, I guess, in deck building because they're not producing mana.
Yeah, like a lot of lands players lean on the Yawgmoth and Urborg, the kind of, like turn my spell lands into lands things. Do you think these cards are like kind of staples of a lands archetype, or are they kind of like sometimes in, sometimes out?
Well, I know you guys aren't playing them, so I guess we can't call them staples. To me, they're staples in, I guess, the sort of build that I'm trying to look at because I am leaning on sort of your Maze of Ith, Dark Depths, Tabernacle kind of lands. So I want those lands in the deck because they effectively function as soul lands. They're tapping for 2 mana, I guess, because they're tapping for 1 and they're allowing one of the other lands to tap for 1.
Yeah, 100%. And like you mentioned that we don't play them, and it's I think for us, like we lean a lot more on the like locking your opponent out forever versus I think your list kind of lock them out just for enough time until they die. And like yeah, for us we kind of have this we hate like their fetch lands being able to tap for mana. It's like no, you need to crack that thing, and then we're going to strip mine what you get with it versus like kind of being a protected mana land. Do you reckon there's any merit to that, or is that just like a bullet which your versions of the list kind of tend to bite?
No, there's absolutely merit to that. I mean, you can let them lean on it and take it away, I guess, if you want to strip your own, but certainly they allow fetches to tap for mana. That also works both ways. Obviously allows you to save your fetches for landfall purposes, so we can take advantage of that as well, but it is something you have to be aware of if you're trying to strip lock someone.
That is cool. I hadn't considered that, hey, that you could, have a, I guess you could have, like, you're waiting for, like, something like Sightcat. Is it Sightcat Cub, or Bristly Bill? And then it's like, great, it's here now, and now I go fetch. Yeah, that's a cool extra piece of utility for that.
Yeah, the cat kills very quickly. People do not understand how quickly that thing can kill you.
Yep. Well, do we want to jump into some of the, like, we've got a deck list, like, this is your green-black lands deck. Maybe, use this as an opportunity to tell people, like, what lands decks are trying to do, and in particular, what this deck's trying to do.
Yeah, so I guess land decks are basically trying to take advantage, like I said earlier, of the fact that there's these really powerful lands that exist in Magic. They're very hard for people to interact with, and they have disproportionately powerful effects. So you have something like Tabernacle. When it comes down, it just basically warps the game around itself. It's just an extremely powerful effect. You have, for example, Dark Depths Thespian Stage, which is sort of a combo that just involves lands. You can put a 20/20 into play and kill someone in one swing. You have Maze of Ith, which again is just a fundamentally broken Magic card. I think it sort of just alters the rules of engagement in a way that probably shouldn't exist, or at least wouldn't be printed today. And a lands deck is just trying to take advantage of that. So we're playing these sort of spell lands. We're playing a higher land count. We're playing a high density of utility lands. We're playing land tutors, and then we're looking at ways to break parity on that resource of lands. So like your exploration, your fast bond, and then obviously your crucibles, etc.
So there's a lot of different fast bond effects that have a gradating in quality. We've got fast bond and exploration at the top, slightly worse like burgeoning. Whenever they play a land, you play a land. When Mouse and I play Summer Bloom, which is a sorcery which lets us play 3 lands but only in 1 turn. And then there are ones like Sakura Tribe Scout, which is tap, put a land into play. And so I guess the question is, where do you draw the line for how good a fast bond effect needs to be before you put it into your deck?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and it sort of has 2 parts to it. I think the first one is just like, a strict matter of card evaluation. And then I think the second part touches on something pretty fundamental to lands deck building. So first of all, you just have like I said, just card evaluation about which of these fast bond exploration style effects are playable in Highlander. It's obviously a really powerful effect. We have obviously a limited number of slots in the deck as well. There's like 20 or probably more cards that have that sort of text with exploration of you can play an additional land. And then some of them, I guess, right out of the gate, just not really in consideration. You've got ones at 5 mana. There's some at 3 mana, so Dryad of the Elysian Grove. You've got Azusawas, but Seeking. Both of those used to be land staples, but are a bit less common these days. And then you have the ones that you mentioned, so Burgeoning, Sakura Tribe Scout in particular, I think are worth looking at because they're 1 mana. So obviously you can get those down immediately on turn 1 and start getting that effect, which is obviously when it's most useful. They both have pretty notable downsides, so importantly, I think neither of them work well with Crucible effects, unlike obviously Fast Bond and Original Exploration. Sakura Tribe Scout, I think, is probably a bit closer to playable in my list because it's a creature. So obviously the downside there is it's vulnerable to removal spells, and it is quite a fragile creature. It's only a 1/1, but I sort of get additional playability out of the fact that it is a creature because I have White, I have Grist, so you can sacrifice it when it's not doing anything to those. I also think it retains some late game utility with instant speed land drops for like your Bajuka Bogs and stuff like that. And then Burgeoning's upside, I guess, is the fact it's an enchantment, so it's just much more resilient. I know you guys prefer it in your list for that reason. So look, I think obviously you've just got to draw a line as to which ones you want to play. Sort of horses for courses. In my current list, I've drawn the line only including Fast Bond and Exploration. And occasionally I'll try Sakura Tribe Scout every now and then. But I think the second part of why we look at these effects is really fundamental to what they're doing in the deck. And I think that's twofold. First, the most obvious aspect is it allows you to break parity on the number of lands you have in play, which is obviously something we're looking to do. It's a very powerful effect. And then the second part, I think, is a bit more subtle, but arguably even more important, because what they're allowing you to do is they're allowing you to blend in the spell lands more seamlessly into your mana base. Because functionally taking a turn off making your mana producing land drops, so lands that actually tap for mana, to play a card like Maze of Ith puts you behind on mana production, obviously. So if it's turn 3, you have 2 lands in play and then you play a Maze of Ith, you still only have access to 2 mana and your opponent's going to pull ahead, which is not what we want. And that's something that you can address in the deck building phase, and I think there's 2 main ways you can go about addressing that. And so I've gone the route where I don't think these sort of lesser exploration effects are that playable, and so what I've done is I've tried to lower the average mana value of spells in my deck until it contained nothing above 3 mana, although I'm currently testing something like this Spawn instead of Barrowgrowth as an exception to that, but generally speaking, nothing above 3 mana. And that solves the issue of not having this super high density of exploration effects in the deck, and therefore you're more readily able to deploy those lands, such as Maze of Ith, even when you don't have the exploration effect, because you can play your 1-drop, you play your 2-drop, then on turn 3 you're happy just to play another 2-drop and put Maze into play, rather than holding like a card in your hand that costs 4 or 5, and therefore you need to keep hitting those mana producing land drops in addition to the Maze. Whereas you guys have some of those higher mana value cards that are really powerful in your deck. So you've got the Bright Glass Gearhulk, you've got On That Focus of Creation, you've got Titania. So you guys need to be hitting those land drops. And so you've loaded up on the lesser exploration effects. And I think that makes sense as well. So you've sort of got an A plus B there. You've got, the A's are the really powerful effects. And then you need the B's, the lesser explorations, to make those work.
Right. So from your point of view, playing an exploration is kind of like double spelling. I get to first spell cast my 2-drop and second spell play a Maze of Ith, whereas from our point of view we're looking at they're a ramp effect for us. We can also sometimes go double spell where they're both lands, but we need the mana a lot more than you do.
I think so, and I think the reason that it sort of works for us both is because we've both looked at what we're trying to do, what cards we've got in our deck, and how to support those. Whereas I think there is sort of something I see in some lands decks where sometimes people have a lot of those more expensive cards in their deck, like say for example Titania, Protector of Argoth, where if you get that into play, you're probably going to win the game. But they haven't loaded up on that density of exploration effects, even the lesser ones. And so then you get into a bit of trouble because you're looking at hands where you don't have the exploration, you have some lands, you have Titania, you have the Maze of Ith, and that just doesn't really gel because you just haven't loaded up on that density. So I think it is something that people need to consider in their deck building phase with lands is, do I want to ditch the expensive spells, bring the mana value down, and allow you to still deploy the utility lands when you don't have these lesser exploration effects? Or do you want to take the approach of loading up on a higher density of exploration effects, and that allows you to play those higher mana value cards?
Yeah, that's right. And so really it's just a spectrum of how inter-synergistic do all of the cards need to be within your deck. If you want them to be more synergistic, you're loading up with more of these exploration effects. And if you're just focusing on like raw card power, like playing your 2 drops and your 3 drops, which interact with lands but not so much as many lands as possible, you'd be playing fewer of these effects.
Yeah, I think so. I think either approach works well in terms of allowing you to deploy those spell lands without too much friction. And the reason some people might have issues, I think, with building their lands decks is because they haven't gone to either of those extremes. They're still trying to play the 5 drops in addition to the mazes without that ramp quality that you guys have chucked into your deck.
Yeah, so the answer is to playing lands is to pick a lane. And then in addition to the gradation of fast bond effects, there's also a lot of different crucible effects. We've got Crucible of Worlds, Conduit of Worlds, now Walking Closet. I think a card was spoiled the other day. It's like 1 blue-green for an enchantment, and when each of these you choose either a Crucible of World effect or like a landfall mill target player for 3 cards. And plus, of course, Rummin' Up, which is really good with Green Sun Zenith. Where do you draw the line with these, and how does that interact with the decision you make before about fast bond and exploration style effects?
Yeah, so I guess interesting to note, only the originals, the original exploration that is, and obviously fast bond with the combo potential interact really well with these crucibles. I think we're actually closer, like my list and your list are closer on the crucible count than we are on the exploration count. So we both play original crucible, we play Walking Closet, we both play Raminap, we both have Green Sun Zenith for Raminap, which is obviously functionally another copy. You guys are on Ren and 6. I'm on Life from the Loam, which is sort of a crucible. And then I think you're also on Khan, which is sort of a slow acting crucible. I guess you can go fetch one from the sideboard. So we're a bit closer on crucible count. I draw the line at 3 mana crucibles personally, basically along the lines of what I was saying before. I'm trying to lower the average mana value of my deck. Once I hit 3 mana and I play a crucible, I'm then looking to ideally use my land drops for stripping my opponent, which is again why I want cards that don't cost more than 3 mana, because once I hit that point, I can still cast all the spells in my deck without making additional land drops that aren't strip lines.
And so this is a Golgari Lands list, but if this new 3 mana enchantment crucible didn't have a blue pip in it, would you play that as a 4th crucible in the deck?
It's hard to know. I haven't sat down and run the numbers on exactly how many crucibles I want in my deck, because I think it's important to note that crucibles stack really poorly. So exploration, for example, if you have 2 explorations, obviously this is Highlander, you can't have 2 of the exact same card, but if you did have 2 exact original explorations, they stack really well. Like then you can make 3 land drops, whereas crucibles, the first crucible allows you to play lands from the graveyard, the second crucible doesn't do anything unless it has additional utility. So I think there is more so with the crucibles, there is a point where you just hit too many, but knowing where that line is quite difficult, because it's obviously an effect we want to see at least one of in a game. But whether or not you want to have 2 in the same hand, that's another question.
Sensible. And just to tag on to the end of that, one of the fast bond effects that you didn't mention before that does work really, really well with crucibles is Summer Bloom. It's hard to have the hand, unless it's in your opening hand, where turn 2 Summer Bloom, you're putting 3 lands into play and then following up with something really strong. I mean, it happens, but it doesn't happen very often. But the power of that card is, if you have a Crucible and it's turn 3 or turn 4 and you cast Summer Bloom, you're destroying your opponent's mana base if you found a Wasteland or a Strip Mine, or you're just ramping out 3 lands and getting a Surveyor land. Given that power, I know it's not currently in your list, but what's stopping you from playing Summer Bloom?
Yeah, I have never really tested much with Summer Bloom. It's an interesting card. I watched you play at CanCon. I watched it rot in your hand, which I guess is the thing that has put me off it, just the potential for it to, be a dead card at times. I try to minimize that in my list. But, as you said, the power is obviously there. It's something I've sort of considered out of the sideboard to try and, like you said, just kind of destroy their mana base immediately against, for example, combo decks, matchups where I do just want to land that killing blow. Yeah, I think it's a totally reasonable inclusion. It's just not a card I've tested. But yeah, the reason I guess I haven't tested it is just the worry that it ends up a dead card in too many situations.
Yeah, look, it was a dead card in that game, but for those listening at home, that was a game where I had both a burgeoning and a fast bond on the field, so I kind of had an embarrassment of riches with that effect, unfortunately.
Yeah, cool. And more questions just on this slide. So one is obviously all green black, and that allows you to play a lot more colorless lands. So like in just for those who don't know, like Liam and I do a lot of like 4 and 5 color brewing of lands, and so we've never been able to make stuff like Rashad Port, Urza Saga, Dark Depths work, but these 2 color lists can house them quite comfortably. What are your thoughts about like how many colors lands decks should be, right? Like, because there are some kind of cards like Ren and Six where you're like, oh my god, this is almost made for me, but it means a whole other color. Like, do you have any thoughts about like the relative strengths and weaknesses of more and less colors and how many colors lands you could play in that stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I tried I'm pretty sure I've tried every single combination. Obviously, you need green in there because it's the base color for lands. But yeah, over the years, I've tried pretty much every single combination. I've settled on 2 colors just for consistency, and I've settled on black. I just think it gives the most as a secondary color. There are obviously merits to playing, any sort of combination, just depending on what you're trying to do. I have sort of a rule when I deck builded lands, I call it the X+1 rule, where I do think that lands mana bases kind of function as X+1 colors. So the +1 is colorless basically, because you have so many colorless lands, you have lands that aren't producing mana, that your mana base is fairly strained. When you actually, take the time to look at what color producing pips you have, you might be surprised how low it can get at times. So if you want to support a high density of utility lands, then I think you want to be playing as few colors as possible. If you want to sacrifice that for more, I guess, raw power in cards like Ren and Six, like you said, obviously still a very valid option. Often, I think the most common is you probably see a lot of people playing 3. So you play Jund, you play Abzan, are fairly common.
And I'm having a look at this mana base here. I'm noticing a Tranquil Thicket, but not a Nurturing Peatland. Could you tell us a little bit about that choice?
Yeah, so I think for me, the Tranquil Thicket versus Canopy Lands is just about what the slot is trying to do. So some people are really into the Canopy Lands because they obviously offer you that fixing when that's what you're trying to do with it. And then later on, they can offer that potential to sort of, quote unquote, cycle it. I think Tranquil Thicket, I'm not too worried about that slot in terms of fixing, and I think Tranquil Thicket does the job better in what it's trying to do. So I'm trying to use Tranquil Thicket to protect my life from loam. I'm trying to use it to, I guess, supercharge my life from loam. So do multiple, life from loam back your Tranquil Thicket back your life from loam, etc. in a single turn to try and dig for an answer.
Can you explain to people how that works? Because that is like a rules interaction which maybe not everyone's seen before.
Yeah, so obviously Life from the Loam can return a Tranquil Thicket that's in the graveyard, and then if Life from the Loam is in your graveyard, Tranquil Thicket can cycle, which allows you to draw a card. You can replace that with a Dredge, so then you can obviously dredge 3, put 3 cards from the top of your library in your bin, and return Life from the Loam to your hand. You can do this at instant speed. You can do the Canopy Land at instant speed as well, but the Life from the Loam is hidden information from your opponent, at least on the first time, which I think is very important. And then notably, you're not going down a land drop, because if you want to get back a Canopy Land, put it into play, that's your land drop. Then if you want to crack it, you're going down effectively that land drop. So when you're digging for a land, using your land drop is not really where you want to be, because you want to find that land and play at that turn.
Yeah, and this is like the digging for the land would be you're trying to find maybe like the second half of the Dark Depths combo or the Glacial Chasm just to give you that one more turn type thing. I'm gonna say I'm glad we're having this conversation because it definitely sold me on the if you need a land to be a draw engine, Tranquil Thicket is much better than the Canopy Lands. Yeah, because the land drop is huge. You don't need an extra land drop to make it work, and also it's one less mana, right? Because like the Canopy needs to tap and the other land needs to tap, whereas Tranquil Thicket is just one to cycle.
Yeah, that's another part of it. I think the most important thing is I think the land drop, but like you said, yeah, you've got that one extra mana cost. I also find that just in general play, if you have the Tranquil Thicket in your hand, obviously you're cycling the Tranquil Thicket to draw a card, that's fine. Whereas if you have the Canopy Land and you're trying to dig your way out of a situation, I'm going to crack this Canopy Land, try and find an answer, you're going down a land to do that. So you're sort of digging the hole a bit deeper just to try and get yourself out. Doesn't necessarily always work out the way you want.
Do you have you tried the black cycle? Oh god, I can't remember what the black cycling was. Is it Baron Moor? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think Baron Moor. I have tried it. When I've played lists that are a bit heavier on this sort of graveyard interaction stuff, I have played it before. And I've also played the Canopy Land in addition to them. But At the moment, I found in the metagame you don't really want to lean too heavily on the graveyard just because we've got a lot of people trying to do overtly powerful things like reanimate, and the hate is obviously there.
Yeah, like Liam and I have found that having like an abrupt decay-esque card in the sideboard, which is nearly always sided in no matter what, is almost like a prerequisite because of that exact feature, right? Like everyone's got some piece of graveyard hate, whether it's like a relic or a Deathy Voidwalker or Emperor Bones or whatever. These land stacks, they don't necessarily look it, but they are very graveyard vulnerable sometimes.
Yeah, graveyard vulnerable, and we're using the graveyard to sort of grind out value. We're not using it to make these big game-changing plays. So you can sort of get away with doing something like Entomb Reanimate, because if you pull that off, you're very likely to win. Whereas if you Entomb, say, Life and Alone, you're trying to grind this advantage out. If they deal with it, you've not put yourself so far ahead that it necessarily made it worthwhile to go down the card on the Entomb. So that's sort of the issue I found.
There's like a very you might say something like there's a very large window for your opponent to interact with you on versus like the Entomb Reanimate, like the window is like literally that turn.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Can I ask, with is there a Karoo in this list? Are you playing the Golgari Rot Farm or not?
No, I know you guys are on a lot of them in your build. I haven't found them to be where I want to be in this build. I'm just not really looking to take the turns off like you guys are. I know you've said to me, you're sort of happy conceding the board for a while, and then, really exploding in these large turns. Whereas I'm sort of more looking to definitely have some board presence, definitely put some pressure on the opponent. I guess the main theme of this deck is we want to be pressuring, and we want to be strip mining, particularly when we're ahead on board. So, play a 1-drop creature, play a 2-drop creature, start strip mining. I think that's, not to say obviously you can do it the way you're doing it as well with these big combo turns, but I think just in general as a once-off, strip mining when you're ahead on board is just a lot more powerful than strip mining when you're in a neutral board position or behind, unless you're sort of cutting their head off immediately like you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's fair. I suppose it's good insight for people who are potentially thinking about lands to know is that cards like the Cruise, because the benefit of them is, for those who are wondering, when you've got cards like Exploration and Fastbomb, they kind of give you an extra land drop. Like Exploration, it sucks when you just run out of lands, but the Karoo lets you then, play the Karoo, then play another land again. But you're right that is really something which is much better if you're more happy to take like big turns in the future, as opposed to the board pressure decks are going to be way less interested in that kind of incremental value.
Yeah, because you're not getting, they come into play tapped, obviously, you're not getting the mana off of that turn. You are sort of essentially paying to draw a card, which is a fine effect, obviously, in Magic, very strong, but it doesn't affect the board.
And that's an interesting thing you just said about strip mining when ahead on board or when neutral on board. If you have an opening hand that's got a strip mine and a 1-drop and a 2-drop, are you putting out the 1-drop and the 2-drop and then strip mining, or are you strip mining on turn 1 and just gambling that they're going to stumble on mana early?
It depends. If I know who I'm playing, if I know what they're on, it's going to change my decision. Certainly, if I'm on play draw, it's going to change my decision as well. But generally speaking, I'm pretty happy to play out my 1-drop and then possibly my 2-drop as well before I strip mine.
Another question I have is so there's like a little known, I don't know if it's a little known, but I don't know if everyone knows, interact between Urza Saga and Thespian Stage, where there's like a timing thing you can do where you can give the Thespian Stage the construct making ability and then turn the Thespian Stage into something else so that it doesn't end up sacrificing itself. And so the net result of this very mana intensive play is you have an infinite, like a Thespian Stage, which basically just can make the construct for the end of time. Is this something which comes up like a lot / at all, or is this just like a pipe dream which people should stop pretending is going to happen? I'm just wondering with a deck like this, what your thoughts are there.
It's not a pipe dream. It does come up, but certainly it's not a super common play pattern. It is relatively slow. Often, if you wanted to do it, unless it's quite in late game and you have a lot of mana, you probably are giving up on making the construct on the 3rd turn. To copy with the Thespian Stage. So it's not something that's going to come up often. If the pieces align, in the late game, or depending on the matchup, if you can do that against, sort of control-ish deck, it's extremely hard to lose. But that's not that's not really an interaction that I would be necessarily looking for. And I think a big part of playing the lands deck effectively is sort of knowing when to go for those interactions or which interactions to start working towards, because forcing a lot of them is often a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah. Talon Gates. Can you tell me about this land?
Yeah, so this is one. This is probably one of two flex slots that I'm sort of tinkering with at the moment. So that'd be Talon Gates and Rishardenport. Those flex slots I sort of switch around between a few cards. Echoing Deeps is one that's been in. A second Surveil in this list is one that's been in. And Talon Gates is what I'm testing right now. Talon Gates is an interesting land. It's sort of like Sejuri's Step, which is an old sort of legacy tech, gives protection to a creature, but it actually phases the creature out. Notably, also Talon Gates can put itself into play for 4 mana, so it has that utility as well. It's an interesting one. So yeah, you can, I guess, you can't force through a Merit Lage like you can with a Sejuri Step, but you can protect one. You can protect, obviously, any of your creatures, particularly off a white, or if you're playing a Knight of the Reliquary, they sort of protect themselves using the Talon Gates. And you can also phase out opponents' creatures, so if they're trying to combo off with a creature, or if they have, a blocker you want to get rid of, or an attacker that you want to stop, you can obviously phase them out with the Talon Gates. So it's interesting tech. It's one of the lands that sometimes you prefer to be in your deck, so you can crop rotate for it when you want it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking that to do it at instant speed really requires that 4 mana, but with crop rotation doing it for 1 is extremely playable. Yeah, that would be really excellent. With the Rishardenport plan, have you thought about leaning into some of the other traditional stacks pieces like Smokestacks or Tanglewire, or has that never been tried?
That's the dream, really, to play like a full pox list, but the Rishardenport is used a little differently here, I think, than how it's used, I guess, in 4 or formats or probably in Legacy lands. The Rishardenport in this list is partially here for matches against combo decks, keeping off certain colors, that sort of stuff, but a big reason of why it's in this list is because it's a cheap way to repeatably trigger the Freeze Try to Lookout. So commit a crime, target your opponent, trigger the Freeze Try to Lookout, and just generate value that way.
Right, yeah, that's really cool. It kind of actually is funny that you're saying it's the dream. I've often thought to myself, I wonder if there's like a lands deck where it just plays like Mishra's Workshop. You just get play this card, play Crucible on turn 1, for the rest of the game, play Strip Mines, and play stuff like Golos, like all these kind of like artifacty lands cards, which no one really considers. Have you by chance done any kind of shops/stacks/lands piles, or is that just too far from the dreamland?
I think like a lot of Highlander players, I have probably hundreds of Moxfield, half completed decks, and I think that's definitely 5 of them. So it's something I've thought about, never something I've really, put the time into testing and playing in person or anything. But
one day if I get access to Mishra's Workshop, I'll definitely have to try and bring it in. Are there any other lands you really want to talk about in this part? Like, it's funny. Like, it's the appropriate episode to spend way more time than usual on just like the lands page. Are there any other ones which you want to draw our attention to, or should we go to the next slide?
Well, we don't want to draw too much attention to them because then people are going to sort of catch on to what they can do. But I think Shifting Woodland is sort of new tech that's really exciting. So Shifting Woodland, if you have Delirium, can become a copy of anything in your graveyard. And that just opens up, just a whole lot of lines. So copying any of your, copy a Crucible if you need one, copy any of your creatures for their abilities. You can copy a Dark Depths, which is in your graveyard to immediately make Merit Lage because the Shifting Woodland doesn't have any counters on it.
Cool, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that gives you like a second bite at the Dark Depths. So you Dark Depths Thespian stage, both pieces go to the graveyard. If they deal with the first Merit Lage, Shifting Woodland comes in, copies the Dark Depths from the graveyard, makes a second Merit Lage. It's quite strong. But just being able to copy anything from your graveyard, instant speed, provided you have Delirium, is a very strong effect on a new land that flies under the radar.
I reckon for us, we nearly always Shifting Woodland fast spawn. It's just like it is often just the thing you activate, which then wins the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Won many games with Shifting Woodland. Hope to win more in the future. I guess the only other one people probably are looking at here and eyeing off is, I think, the Tabernacle is just a big part of lands. Unfortunately, because of the price tag, but it's a big part of what draws the deck together. It's a big part of what allows you to play the prison side of the prison combo, I guess, game plan.
Yeah, and like Tabernacle, it's interesting, right? Because in your deck you play quite a few creatures. How in your mind do you kind of like break the symmetry?
Yeah, I guess often I'm put into situations where I'm paying for my creatures, they're paying for theirs, and that slows the game down, which is something that I'm interested in doing in a lot of situations. And then also, I'm happy to maintain, let's say they have 3 creatures and I have 3 creatures. I'm happy for us both to pay 3 mana for a couple of turns, slow the game down a little bit, and then once I can set up my, Crucible, my Loam, something like that, ideally with, an exploration or something, I can start stripping their lands. And, if you get to that point in the game, that's sort of the beginning of the end for the opponent.
Yeah. So like your land drops put you ahead, and then your disruptive elements, the strip mines and stuff like that, then put them behind, and it just kind of the vice squeezes, so to speak.
So without the Tabernacle, you can take all their lands, but if they have creatures that are bigger than yours or more, more creatures than yours, you're possibly still going to die, even though they have no lands. With the Tabernacle, each time you strip, that's one more creature they have to sacrifice, or more accurately, be destroyed. And then if you get that strip mine lock with the Tabernacle in play, you've also got a creature lock.
Yeah. Cool. Lion, do you have any other thoughts about the lands pile before we move on?
Yeah, the Dryad Arbor I think might raise some eyebrows. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Dryad Arbor is like old school tech now. Originally, probably would have been in the deck or the decks back in the day as you're having a fetch land, so that people used to play, I guess, a lot more edict effects. And your Marit Lage, one of the few ways to deal with a Marit Lage back in the day was to play an edict and have them sacrifice it, because it was quite hard to deal with the indestructible token. That's less true because they printed a few more specific edicts, and there's just a lot more answers to the Marit Lage token these days than there used to be. So the Dryad Arbor's role in the deck has changed. These days, it's there for a few reasons. It allows Green Sun Zenith to effectively function as a mana dock. So Green Sun Zenith for X equals 0 fetches Dryad Arbor. You've basically, cast a 1 mana dock into play. And then probably more so the reason it's in the deck at the moment is because it turns a fetch land into a creature. And then that creature can be sacrificed to Grist or White. So with White, it basically turns any fetch land into any land you want. And with Grist, it turns a fetch land into removal.
Yeah, that's cool. It's there's all these little like kind of interlocking engines, right, which I think makes land stacks so appealing, right? It's like, oh, I've got all these different cogs in the machine, and that just goes to show that now Dryad Arbor turns any fetch land into two or three things, which is really cool. Like really got a neat feature of these types of decks.
Yeah, it makes them fun to think about. It makes them fun to play. It makes them hard for opponents who haven't played against them very often to understand, what you're doing or what the next line is. And then in a way, it also makes it difficult to play against people who really do have a good understanding of what you're trying to do and why.
Yeah, how often do you reckon your opponents just actually play into onboard tricks?
People do not, broadly speaking, obviously we have a lot of, very good pilots in the format and people who do understand the deck, but, broadly speaking, talking about everyone who plays 7-point, people do not understand how the deck works too well. So hopefully I don't give away too much information now, but, certainly people who've played against it a lot, who spend a lot of time, jamming the format, they really know how to pick apart the weak points and sort of, take you down.
Certainly, Lime and I have dreams and visions of this podcast becoming like the most popular thing since sliced bread in the 7-point community. But even though I feel like we will be spreading a few secrets here, it might just be to the devoted. So you already know. I guess time will tell. Lime, do you want to take us to the next slide? So what we've got here? Sorceries, instance, artifacts. Tell us about some of the notable card choices in this pile.
Yeah, I guess one of the main draws to black for me was it covered up, I guess, one of the major weaknesses of the deck, which is not really having too many ways to interact with combo.
Mm-hmm.
And so that offers you hand attack. I'm currently only running 2 pieces here. I've got the dress in the sideboard as well. Depending on the metagame, I'll sometimes shift that up. I won't really ever shift it down from 2. I'll shift it up to 3 or 4, but that's sort of one of the draws, I think, into black. And then obviously black, has fairly efficient removal as well. And then at the moment, currently on DT, which is, thankfully you guys mouse put it down to 2. So we're happy to take that and slot it into lands.
Yeah, look, it's certainly one of those cards which it's pleasant, seeing a pleasant amount of play at 2, and it doesn't seem to be breaking anything in half. And yeah, it just feels like a card people should consider nowadays, which is nice.
Yeah, then I
Um,
guess the other. Oh, I see. You've just got land tutors, I guess, is sort of the main other thing that sticks out probably to people who are looking at this. Land tutors are a major part of the deck, and thankfully, because they're fetching, quote unquote, only fetching lands, they're generally fairly efficient.
yeah, definitely. Like most traditional tutors, for example, if it was just unconditional, would either be pointed like demonic tutor, or they would cost 3, or have some sort of drawback, or like Rustic tutor, Grim tutor, etc. But like Sylvan Scrying is just basically like a 2-mana demonic tutor for lands, which you get a lot more power out of the tutor because it's only searching for lands. But when you're playing the broken ones, you definitely feel like you're doing something unfair.
Yeah, certainly, crop rotation, incredibly powerful card. Silver Scrying, very powerful card. You see them also sometimes pop up even in your shop decks. Just anyone who's playing, extremely powerful lands is looking for ways to tutor them.
Out of interest, I know a lot of people who are playing crop rotation have had their heart broken by mental misstep. Do you have any advice for the lands players who are trying to avoid this, or is it just a matter of you've just got to eat it?
Yeah, just go ahead and get yourself a old border foil because they actually can't be misstepped. So
What's the story there?
no story. They just can't be misstepped. You can't misstep an old border foil crop rotation.
Okay,
I don't think I've never had it happen to me. So
right, you've heard it here first, folks. I was wondering though, like, are there any like for example, I know with your list, you've got a lot more proactive 1-drops, and you've got the hand attack. Like, I'm wondering if maybe it is just a matter of sequencing, or if it's just a matter of making the right density of 1-drops and deliberately sandbagging crop rotation into like a really impactful moment or something. Like in your mind, is crop rotation, is this an early game card? Is this like a mid game card? Is this a finishing blow? Like what turn does this card usually get used on?
um, it's an interesting one. It's obviously dependent on game state, but I would say generally not a card you're casting on turn 1 or 2. It generally comes down a bit later. Um, Often it's end step trying to assemble the Merit Leech combo.
Mhm.
Often it's just putting into play whichever land you need it. At that time, whether that's there's a Saga, whether that's Tabernacle, Maze of Ith, obviously just represents any land which is its power.
Mm.
But it's despite obviously costing 1, you're not really just playing a forest and crop rotating for a Maze of Ith or something. It's just not really profitable.
Yeah. And I would probably say that that would contribute to maybe like you getting misstep not as much, because if it is happening, yeah, at the end of turn, more in the mid to late game, there's been a very large window for that misstep to hit other things. Which I don't know if people are holding misstep, particularly for crop rot. Like that kind of seems like a recipe just for the misstep netter to get used. Like I don't know anyone who would, for example, like have a Thoughtseize cast against them and then not misstep it on the spot.
Yeah, and if they misstep your crop rotation, they can't misstep your fast bond. So yeah.
Hmm.
So there's silver linings even for the nightmare misstep.
I
I certainly would like to see misstep, at the same points level as crop rotation, whether that involves crop rotation at 0 or misstep at 1. But obviously the format doesn't revolve around lands, so.
It's well, you say that, but Lance has received quite a few depointings recently, not just Monarch Tutor, but Fast Bond and Strip Mine, and then a little bit further in the past, Life from the Loam. How do you think those depointings have affected the texture of your deck and its place in the meta?
I think most importantly, it just proves that if you complain in the Discord enough, eventually, they'll have to listen to you. No, but like you said, we've got a lot of depointings recently, and then lands tends to dodge, most of the pointings because we're unfortunately not a top deck in the metagame. So I think they've probably put 20, maybe this is just off the top of my head. I'm just totally guessing, but I reckon they've put about 20 or 30 points, on the points list over the last couple of years, and Lance has really only copped, I guess, Ren and Six probably from 1 to 2, and then probably some cards that people were playing in lands that weren't necessarily like quote unquote lands cards, like your Reanimates, Demonic Council, for example. So Lance has gotten a lot stronger based off, dodging pointings, getting some depointings. We've got, you mentioned Fast Bond, Strip Mine, Demonic Tutor, Life from the Loam. And then just new printings as well. So I think a decent chunk, probably almost a quarter of the list I'm on at the moment, was printed in the last couple of years.
Can I ask about a few other card choices? So Zero, obviously Clan of Classic, 0 mana, sacrifice land, gain 2 life, allows the fast spawn Crucible, Zero live. Have you done any experimenting with the Dark Heart of the Wood, the sacrifice the forest to gain 3 life enchantment?
Only in my head. I've watched you guys do it, and I'm always keen to see, the potential for those different cards. I think there's another one, the Overgrown Estate, the 3 mana one. There might even be others. I don't know. You guys can probably tell me.
We've
Yeah, I mean,
scoured
those
Gatherer.
3 are the ones, right?
Yeah, those are the only ones.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously a really powerful effect in terms of having the combo, and then also just a very powerful effect in terms of sometimes just keeping you alive. Yeah, I guess Zero Orb, obviously is the cheapest, costs 0. In a deck like mine where you have Urza's Saga, it can pop out of an Urza's Saga, which is, I think, a big upside. I think, obviously you guys are on a lands deck, which is just radically different from what I'm doing, so you're sort of leaning more towards combo. And that's where probably, you might want those additional ones. I have sort of thought about whether I might play 1 or 2 of the other ones out of the sideboard if I want to do sort of a juke there, but not really something that I've experimented with too much.
Yeah, fair enough. Another kind of part of another potential combo piece is there's also Conduit of Worlds, which is the 4 mana Crucible of Worlds, which lets you once a turn. It's a very restrictive limitation. It's like you can tap it to cast a permanent from your graveyard, but that's you can't do it if you've already cast another spell this turn, and after you've done it, this is the only spell you can cast. So it's like just like one big thing a turn. Have you done any experimenting with the Conduit of Worlds, and any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, when it came out, I put it in my deck and just sort of had a feel for how it played. Again, it just sort of depends on what you want to do, like whether you want to stack up that many Crucible effects in your deck or which ones you want. Like we were saying with the sort of versioning archetype Scout, in terms of how they do an impression of the more powerful ones of that effect, Exploration, Fast Spawn, the ones that incidentally work with the Crucibles. You just sort of have to draw a line somewhere, right? Like you only have 60 cards, or in my deck 61 cards that you can play, and you just sort of have to make a decision about what goes where.
I think we found that the Conduit, it's kind of only really good if the card you're casting is like a massive haymaker. It's not really good enough to grind out value 1 card at a time if the card you're grinding out with is just some 1 or 2 drop. Like it really has to be a big impactful card where it feels powerful to cast it over and over again.
Well, the card that I normally either get is Fast Spawn, win the game, or Titania, sack all my lands, win the game, because both of those don't require me casting any other spells afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, winning the game is always great. So if it's helping you win the game, then it's probably doing its job.
You know what? Next I don't know how often I win the game. I've got a little notebook where I just strike them down like tallies on a prison wall.
Lime is in the Lands prison. Lands purgatory. One other kind of engine we've fiddled with and wondering if you had any thoughts on is Khan the Great Creator. And the reasoning is that Lands sometimes is a deck which generates a lot of mana. And Khan is definitely a good way to use mana because, obviously the only limitation of that card winning the game is, basically mana, right? Like if everyone had 10 mana willy-nilly, it would just be Khan Lattice over. But also because if you use the Dark Heart of the Wood and the Conduit of Worlds, you can put one of the Crucible effects on the sideboard and the Zero Orb on the sideboard, and then Khan kind of gets either side of the engine. Have you had any experiences with Khan the Great Creator at all, or does it feel very much like something for a different kind of Lands deck?
No, this was probably one of the things that you guys, popped out in terms of new tech that most interested me, and probably the one that would be easiest to slot into the sort of Lands deck I'm playing, I think. And I have fiddled with it a little bit, so putting the original Crucible of Worlds in the sideboard. I don't really want to put the Zuro Orb in the sideboard because, like I said, it pops out of the Urza's Saga. So you're sort of just taking it from one way to another at the cost of a sideboard slot. But certainly putting the one Crucible in the sideboard there And playing the Khan gives you an extra angle of attack. Something I've tried before. I do generally try and keep the mana value of this deck as low as possible, just to remain, very efficient, and to sort of maximize the amount of times that I can start stripping as early as possible. So, having to play the Khan, then fetch the Crucible, then play the Crucible, sort of adding an extra step in there. So again, it's sort of just depending on what you want to be doing and how you want to be doing it. But I do think of the cool sort of innovations that you guys have worked on in your list, that's probably the one that I think would port best over to this list if people were interested in doing that.
Yeah, cool. Dude, speaking of low to the ground pressure, do we want to have a look at the next slide and have a look at what the threat suite for this deck is?
Yeah,
All
so
right.
you're probably...
No, you go take it away. Tell us what how this one works.
Yeah, like I said, I guess the creature suite here is fairly low to the ground. And I guess probably about half of them, I guess, I don't know, just sort of two-balling here, but probably about half of them are actual cards that I would consider kind of lands cards, like a 6 or something Microspawn or White of the Reliquary. And then some of them are just good, efficient creatures. So your Hex Drinkers, your Netherghosts. Currently don't have Barrowglyph in the deck. I'm trialing the selling Microspawn in that slot, but Barrowglyph as well, Emperor of Bones. These cards that are just very efficient, very low to the ground. And one of the, I guess, features of some of these cards is that they scale well. So they scale well, particularly they scale well when, I guess, quote unquote, nothing is happening in the game. So I'm just strip mining them, keeping them off lands. We're just sort of trading resources in terms of, I kill your creature, you kill mine. You have ones like Netherglyph, Hex Drinker, Elvish Reclaimer, Scythecat Cub, Bristly Bill, White of the Reliquary, and then Barrowglyph if it's in there. They all grow as the game progresses. So some of those grow through landfall with the counters. Some of them grow through the graveyard, getting more and more cards in the graveyard. But the important thing is that they scale as the game progresses.
Yeah, because you're kind of imagining getting the game into like a steady state where really it's like they play a land, you play a land, the lands dies, and then it's a rinse repeat. So that's why those landfall guys are so important, because it like breaks that symmetry, right? Like when that's happening, you're getting ahead, but they're just kind of stuck in the same place.
Yeah, so you're breaking parity in this instance on the size of your creatures, I guess. And then I guess the other reason to have these sort of efficient creatures in your deck, like I mentioned before, I think it's really powerful to strip mine when you're ahead on board. So playing your 1-drop creature, playing your 2-drop creature, playing a Crucible, starting to go to town on their mana is really powerful. And then also because one of your worst matchups is fast combo decks, you just want to have, I think, some fairly efficient beaters in your deck. Playing a turn 1 Netherglyph, playing a turn 2 Emperor of Bones, then trying to do your lands things is just a very good way to pressure those decks that, if you can make them stumble with the strip mines, maybe you can get there with the creatures. Whereas if you are not playing those 1 and 2-drop creatures, you're just trying to go to town on their mana. I think often, my experience at least, was that they're just going to combo you a few turns later than they would have otherwise comboed you. As opposed to, they're dead, so they can't combo you.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, like it's never enough of the combo deck to just like kill 1 or 2 lands, because as you said, they're happy to wait too. It needs to be paired with pressure. And like, what do you think like the next best 1-drop is that you would consider playing? Because obviously it feels very much like 1-drops are like the king, right? Because the dream would be you play a 1-drop and then the next turn you strip mine them, because then if they haven't done anything, well then like, wow, it feels like you're a million years ahead, right? It's almost like casting Time Walk. So like, am I kind of right that like 1-drops feel like they're almost like at a special premium in this deck?
Yeah, 1-drops and 2-drops I think are very important. I've played with the Iridescent Vine Lasher before, which can be quite it's quite an innocuous card. It doesn't read that powerfully, but it can be quite strong, particularly if you're playing multiple lands in a turn. Particularly if you can put say for example, start copying it with the Nantuko. The pings start to add up very quickly, and it also has some combo applications. So that's one that I've played with. I guess in the 2-drop slot, just like you can just play Tarmogoyf still. It's still a very, very good creature. So anything I think, with 2 power at 1 mana is worth considering.
Well, actually, out of interest, like it's almost a good limit test. There's a card I think coming out soonish, from I think it's the Final Fantasy one. It's just like the Chocobo, so it's like a single green 0/1, which has landfall, put a counter on it. Is a card like this, likely to be considered just as, kind of it does that scaling thing, or is it just like a little bit too narrow?
Yeah, I think I'm notoriously bad at judging how cards are going to perform until I play with them. But that's certainly one that caught my eye. Like you said, it sort of ticks the box in terms of scaling. It's ostensibly a lands card. It has landfall on it, and the counters. We have some synergy with Bristly Bill doubling counters, that sort of stuff. So it's certainly one that I'm very interested in. Definitely gonna test it out. Whether or not it sort of remains in the deck, remains to be seen.
A lot of these threats are kind of graveyard orientated, plus some of the other cards in the main deck, like the Crucibles and the Life from the Loam. How do you deal with graveyard hate in games 2 and 3?
Yeah, so I guess part of that is trying to balance, the fact that not all of them rely on that. So Bristly Bill and Scythecat card are quite important, but I guess we try to sometimes run a bit of a sideboard juke. So at the moment, I'm running a Retreat to Hagra and a Boro combo out of the sideboard, which Retreat to Hagra basically has landfall. Your opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. A Boro functions similar to what you were saying earlier, the Karoo lands, which can bounce a different land. The Aboro land bounces itself, so it comes into play untapped, taps for 1 mana, and you can pay 1 mana to return it to your hand. So you can basically play Boro as many times as you want if you have Fastbond in play. Normally you would take a damage doing so for each time you played it, but the Retreat to Hagra turns off that damage and then drains your opponent instead. So if you have Fastbond, Retreat to Hagra, and a Boro, you can drain your opponent from any life total. And that doesn't involve the graveyard. So that's sort of one of the ways we try and dodge the graveyard hate is I normally cut 1 Crucible and I'll bring in the Retreat. I'll cut the land that seems worst in the matchup and bring in the Aboro, and that just gives you a way to combo that doesn't involve the graveyard, because pretty much all the other combos do. And then you can also do that with the Vine Lasher, which is not in my list at the moment, but the Vine Lasher is sort of like similar to Retreat to Hagra. It does the damage, doesn't give you the life, so you need to have more than double their life total, I think, or if you've managed to offspring, you can have more than half their life total, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because we've kind of had a similar thought of like, how do you is it better to just interact with the graveyard hate off the board or just dodge it completely? And one of the cool things about the Lands Discord is that people have so many crazy ideas. Like one of the other ones, I don't know if this one's yours, but is using the Sorin, the one with Extort, like the creature which flips into the Planeswalker, where you can kind of pack up your land bases or an flip it and then just dome them to the face. Have you ever have any experience with that, Duke?
Yeah, this one came about because I was playing the Vintage Cube, and Alpha Frog, who people might be familiar with from LSV's Vintage Cube videos on YouTube, Alpha Frog just killed me with Sorin and Zuranorp, which I, until that point, had not clocked as a combo. I just didn't realize those 2 cards comboed together. Yeah, turns out they do. So that happened to me. I ran to the Lands Discord and said, hey, guys, this is actually a Lands combo. Has anyone tried it? I don't think anyone tried it at that point. People have adopted it since. I've played it a few times myself. The Sorin can feel a little weak as an individual piece, and I have floated before. Maybe Living Wish for Sorin out of the sideboard could be something to work on. But yeah, that's a really neat combo that pretty much no one, I think, passes until it happens to them, because Sorin is a 2025 Magic card. It has so much text. Even if you read it, you're probably not thinking, does this combo with Zuranorb? So once the Sorin actually flips, which you can flip it with the Zuranorb by sacking some lands to the Zuranorb to gain some life. Once it flips and you're able to activate that ability, hold priority and sack all your lands with the Zuranorb, even if they remove the Sorin, it's still going to resolve and kill them. So it's quite a powerful combo, and I think you guys have maybe adopted it into your deck.
Is it currently in our? It's definitely in the considering, if not the sideboard.
It's in the sideboard for the 5-color summer, but it's not in the pool party because it doesn't have black.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, look, it's this is the cool thing about Lands, right? There's just so many different little engines and different dukes to play. Do you have any other non-graveyard dukes top of mind, which is another kind of thing to consider?
In this deck at the moment, like I said, I'm running that sideboard duke. The other way I sort of approach it is not really from a duke perspective. It's just from having some creatures in the deck that are still going to operate under that graveyard hate. So, Elvish Reclaim is still a very strong creature. Hexdrink is probably the premium example, I think, at 1 mana. You've got the Bristly Bill and the Scythecat card, which are, your premium ones at 2 mana. And then Free Strata Lookout is somewhat of a contentious one in the Lands Discord. Some people really like it, some people don't like it at all. But part of why I do like it is because it's a very strong effect that doesn't involve the graveyard at all.
Yeah, the freeze try to look at's interesting. I tried to build like a version where I think it was more Jund because I like the Ren and 6 pinging to trigger it as well. And I was using the like the Field of Ruin-esque lands because they're kind of like they're more wastelands and strip mines to so that every turn you can keep going and getting even more of them. Hopefully, eventually finding waste and strip. Have you had any success with that kind of like Field of Ruin? I think there's like 3 or 4 functional copies of it now. Like esque version, or is it just too intensive on the colors?
I haven't gone that deep. Like I said, I have started playing with Rashad Port because it's a repeatable way to do it. With just, I guess, functionally 2 mana because you're tapping the Rashad Port and you're tapping one of your mana sources to do it, but that's a repeatable way to do it. You can also do it with Destiny Stage if you're willing to put functionally 3 mana into it. But I think generally with the Free Strider, I'm often looking to trigger it with the Strip Mine or the Wasteland. And then sometimes it itself finds those lands or finds Rashad Port. And then otherwise just trying to trigger it just through general gameplay. Obviously you want to be, committing crimes, so targeting your opponent's creatures, targeting your opponent, hand attack, removal, etc.
Yeah. I'm interested with Free Strider, and I'm also thinking this from like Free Strider, Sowing Marcus Spawn, Ramina. Is there any room for a card like City of Traders in these lists? As kind of like you can always Crucible it back later. It definitely means that like the Free Strider can come out with a fetch land more on top. I'm thinking of like a play pattern like turn 1 Exploration, City of Traders, turn 2 play the Free Strider, like then play the Waste Strip, or you play the Crucible, then play land, then play City again type thing. Have you done any like City of Traders experimentation in these 2 colors lists?
Yeah, it's a card that we have discussed quite a bit in the Lands Discord. We have some people who are on Ancient Tomb and are big fans of Ancient Tomb, just getting, like you said, your 3 drops, you also your Crucibles and that out a turn earlier. I haven't tried City of Traders in this list specifically. I have, talked about it with people in Discord, and I do think it definitely probably has at least some legs in terms of worth testing. Like you said, we're able to recur it so that the downside is a bit less than in some decks, and turning crop rotation into +1 mana. So people do that obviously with Ancient Tomb. You could do the same thing with City Traders. Is not nothing. This deck does want to accelerate out a 3-drop on turn 2. It has 5 ways to do it, and only I guess an important part is when you can put it on a land. Obviously, that's something that we're looking to do.
Well, it actually makes me think as well. Not that I don't know if this has come with the Lands Discord, but these types of land decks where you were saying before, it's like X+1 colors, like it's green and black and colorless. I wonder, should we be looking at Kozilek's Command? Some of these like broken Eldrazi cards. It's another way to kind of break parity, because like certainly that card is extremely powerful if you've got the mana, and usually Lands does have it lying around.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like one that's on my to buy list. I really want to get my hands on a copy of Kozilek's Command and start playing with it because, like you said, it's just a very strong card, and we have a lot of colorless sources. I would not be surprised if that's something that probably should be in the deck.
Cool. Have you got any questions on this one?
No, I've got no extras.
Well, in that case, do we want to move towards some quick fire questions and looking to close the episode out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kix, we like to end our episodes with 3 or 4 quick fire questions. We kind of tailor them to our guests, so try and answer them without thinking too hard. So the first one is should Brainstorm be 1 point?
Yes, I think it should. I think it would immediately go to being one of the more played 1-point cards. I think it should be there on power level. I know it would make a lot of people quite annoyed, but that's a positive. So I would personally put Brainstorm to 1.
I'm just trying to figure out if Liam's trying to trigger more of that question, me or Kix fell the opposite direction.
The next, the next one is Mental Misstep, 0 or 1?
I don't have super strong feelings on Mental Misstep in terms of how it, functions within the format as a whole, whether or not it's helping people do broken things or stopping people doing broken things. I do think it's kind of fair that everyone gets to play it. I dislike strongly that it obviously hits my crop rotation and functions as a strip mine as well. If I was if I had total power of the format, I would probably put it to 1, but I don't feel as strongly about it as some people do.
And finally, if Basic Island went to 1, would there be enough Blue Mages tiers for more islands to be produced?
Yeah, I think so. Anything that decreases the dominance of blue in Eternal formats, I personally think that's a good thing, because Wizards obviously made these design mistakes in the start of the game, and in my opinion, how they divided up what each color can do in the color pie. Blue is the strongest color in Eternal formats. That's just sort of how it is, which is fine. But 7 point, we have the power to sort of adjust the metagame like that. I'm not suggesting we put Island to 1, but if we did, there'd be a lot of tiers, and that'd be quite interesting.
I'm feeling personally attacked by these quick fire questions. I
don't know, Kix is ever the cool cat. I thought I might be able to get a little bit of a rise, but seemingly not.
No, look, it's a good for the memes. I'm there for it. I've actually thought of one more question, which might not be quick fire, but I would be remiss not to ask you. What do you think the number one mistake is that people playing against lands makes? Like, what's the number one? These people, they don't know what a lands deck is. How can you clock them as being the uncultured type?
It's probably easy to answer the other way around. Like, what people who are playing lands and not that used to playing the deck, what mistake they make, which I think is trying to force a certain plan, like, oh, okay, I'm going to just try and make Marit Lage as quick as possible or something. That's, to me, is like I'm not saying you can't do that. Like, there are certain situations where you should, but sort of tunnel visioning and not considering the sort of toolbox nature of the deck and what you should be doing. But to answer your question, you actually asked me, people playing against lands, it's tough. I guess just not understanding which lands are relevant in which spots, like what they need to be concerned about and what they need to try and play around. I know that's not a very good answer to it, but it's really just sort of, like I said, when describing a lands deck, when you see it, it is probably kind of hard to pinpoint what mistakes people are making against lands, but I think you can tell them when you see them.
I hear what you're saying. It's kind of like that. What's that Irish saying of something about potatoes in hands and grounds? It sounds like it's the people who focus too much about the potatoes which are on the field, right? Like the lands which are currently there versus all the lands in the deck which come out at any moment off a crop or a wide or whatever. That it's people should be playing towards what the deck could do next turn as opposed to what it's doing right now, type thing.
Yeah, I mean, like any deck, right? Like what are they representing? If you're holding up 1 green mana, you're representing crop rotation. So do you want to go for your, say reanimate plan or something in the face of that? I guess is a good one.
Yeah. Cool.
What's more frightening, 1 green mana or 2 untapped islands?
Oh yeah, that would have been the quick fire question.
you can't counter a land, so I don't really have that much fear of 2 untapped blue lands. But
True.
I think lands, this deck lands is naturally a deck that plays well into blue-based decks. So one of the reasons, people might pick up a lands deck is because it has a good matchup against Grixis, for example. Doesn't mean that, you're going to win all your games against Grixis or anything. And there's a lot of good pilots on Grixis who will be able to pick you apart. But certainly lands probably has a positive matchup, I think, against Grixis, which is, one of the positives to it.
Awesome. Well, Kix, thanks very much for joining us. I hope that there's a lot of people out there who might be inspired to pick up a lands deck and give it a go. Hopefully as well that there are lots of existing lands pilots who maybe understand some of the things the deck is trying to do a little bit better, or have got a few more ideas for engines they might want to experiment with, because that is one of the beauties of playing lands. There are so many different ways to play it. Thanks so much for joining us. Listeners out there, if you're a bit of an aficionado at a particular archetypal deck and you want to come on board and have a chat with Liam and I, please send him a message, because we're always looking for, guests with the Discords, particularly those with a lot of experience with an archetypal deck. And if you're a listener of the podcast and you enjoy it, well, please subscribe to us on YouTube.